Well, off we go. It looks like we are streaming. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 13th of October, 2025, in our ongoing year of doom. And of course, remember, tartucanwordpress.com. Lots and lots and lots of cute little stuff in there. And where is my bloody screen here? Come on. Losing my... Loop. There we go. Lost my little stop sharing window. Oops. Yeah, I'm an old man. What the hell can we say? Stay protected as you browse. Try now. Nope, we don't want to have another cute little thing on Windows on Edge. As you know, we are continuing our source-by-source analysis of Titans of the Earth, Sea, and Air, the creationist tome from Sarfati and Tay. There'll be a little follow-up this week, a thing we alluded to about the Allentoft paper that we had a link up for Thomas and Tomkins. I've now had a chance to look a little bit more into it because it was not one I had been familiar with, and we'll be giving some little highlights on that little part. Also, this week in Creationists Passing On news, Walt Brown, Kent Hovind's super-duper icon and go-to oracle has gone to whatever reward they're going to go to. Brown is the purveyor of hydroplate theory and the like, which hasn't really gained too hell of a lot of traction, although there's still a small cadre of lower echelon creationists that are still terribly impressed with it. We'll be alluding to all of that in Volume 2 of Rocks We're There. So, anyway, Evolution, our Sarfati and Tay's next chapter, number 14, is Did Dinosaurs Survive the Flood? And it was really a disappointing, sad thing. It's very short. I was expecting something more about dinosaurs actually surviving the flood, post-flood, how far. They're kind of going to be leaking into that in regards to mythic lore in the next chapter. But basically, this chapter was about something else altogether, which was just exactly how big was the ark, and was there space enough for dinosaurs, and what their growth rates were, and all this kind of stuff. So effectively, it was a ginormous retread of a lot of creationist lore, mainly Sarfati himself, but also John Woodmarap's crusty old dinosaur Noah's Ark feasibility study from 1996, which also will be getting some mention in Rocks for Their Volume 2. Only two off-the-shelf technical papers have gotten alluded to in the entire chapter. Both by Gregory Erickson et al., of which one previous one, 2004, had been peripherally cited, all on dinosaur growth rate and all that. Dragging in the 2001 paper, though, was maybe a little more dangerous methods-wise, because that was explicitly relating to reptiles and birds, with the conclusion that birds clearly attained a portion of their elevated growth rates from their dinosaurian ancestry, even though later birds were going to be building off of that. So it's a pretty thin operation going on with this particular chapter. There'll be some stuff which, depending on if I can locate the link on it, it should be available. There was apparently another little study on the supposed feasibility of the ark in high seas. That was from a creationist conference from quite a few years back that I hadn't been aware of. We'll be tracking that little puppy down and also incorporating that into Rocks for Their Volume 2. Anyway, in previous episodes, of course, I alluded to the Allentoft paper that was being skirted around rather peripherally by Sarfati and Tay, and that they were dragging in an awful lot of creationist material. In fact, with this particular chapter, they've now shot up to the point where they have as many creationist sources cited as technical papers, about 147 which is which is not a huge number of sources. There's only like 300 some odd that so far have come up in the entire book. They're running at an average of about 1.9 per page references. I look more into finding out what was in this 2014 thing. And to some extent, it's about half of the references in it are things that were not already being churned in the creationist literature as technical citations, although an awful lot of them are quite old. There are a few items as well that were in my reference bibliography in a different context, such as one from 2014, obviously quite recent paper for them, Tomkins and Thomas, when they were doing their piece, by Meyer et al., which is on the mitochondrial genome of a hominin. And all of this relates to the fact that the technology was improving. People were figuring out better ways to detect DNA. There were more examples and samples. And so the trope that Thomas and Tomkins were using, that if there's a survival of DNA or biological fragments or any other things, that it must be because they're only 6,000, well, 4,400 years old in the flood. And that anything to the contrary has to be faulty radiometric dating, trying to calibrate it with radiocarbon dating, or just getting the numbers wrong as to how long molecules could last. It was all pretty fluffy material. And so they're treating this stuff as somehow it serves to exposing the error of their excessive age assignments. So it's a pretty brave piece. It's now, of course, 11, 12 years old now, coming up on 12, that the field has moved on, as we'll be summarizing in considerable detail, the 400,000, 700,000 dates and the like of some of these DNA fragments has been surpassed even better by much more sophisticated analytical techniques that have come along in the decades since. So this was just basically whistling in the dark by Thomas. And by the way, Thomas of the team, Thomas and Tomkins, Thomas has been one of the major characters in the whole creationist soft tissue thing. That he's just been banging the drum relentlessly at ICR, and has, of course, written some of these little co-authored technical papers, a few of which have actually popped up in regular journals, although relatively low echelon kind of pay-for-play kind of stuff. That we have been alluding to previously, and we'll get a little run over more when we pull apart all the little details about the progress of the field in The Rocks Were There, Volume 2. So that gives you a little bit of sidebar looking into in terms of comparing the technical literature and their building off of this stuff versus the creationists that have that little line in the sand about the survival of biomolecules, invariably not going into great detail on what lengths of things were found, what were the conditions of finding them. And so the field has just been progressing, and the creationists are still running the same routine that was starting to come into play, actually not all that long before that 2014 creationist paper. It's in that really period from 2012, 2013, 2014, 15, that it really kind of picks up in the creationist literature, and they've never let go of it since. It's just a continuous barrage in the creationist canon. I'm trying to think of something that would be as relentless a counterpart. It's actually as common a feature in recent apologetics as the thermodynamic argument was in the Duane Gish era. And although thermodynamics hasn't disappeared completely from the creationist lexicon, it's toned down an awful lot. And so this is one of the later blips that if you have lists of creationists saying, here's the evidence against evolution, you are guaranteed to get a reference to soft tissue, and most probably references to Brian Thomas. So this is kind of like the current go-to peripheral item. Meanwhile, again, the science field continues to move on. I was always amused at the fact that dinosaurs were always the top kicker here because they're the famous things. But Schweitzer's work was also working with other Mesozoic animals, turtles, and quite a few other taxa, where they were extracting little teeny snippets of things out of bone fragments and the like. But the one thing we do not have, and that no creationist has ever offered because they don't exist, is anything that is supposedly millions of years old that is preserved as spectacularly as, say, frozen mammoth or Ötzi, the Iceman, which are all relatively recent organisms and have been preserved in conditions of just full body fossils and tissues with, you know, meat and stuff attached to it, in a way that is would seem ought to have been really, really common if those sorts of conditions were taking place ubiquitously in the flood. Sorry, spoiler alert, that's not how the flood could have worked. So there's a reason why you don't see ubiquitous, stupendous preservation, even in these cases of soft tissue preservation. They're microscopic, little teeny things, you know, measured in microns, not something that you can see very large. You can get impressions of things, and once in a while have a detailed tissue impression that can be really quite informative, going all the way back and way before you could get any fragments, Ediacaran biota, and other than that, which is another little interesting thing. How come we can't get that level of soft tissue preservation in Ediacaran biota? I can tell you that biologists and paleontologists would practically sell their grandmother to get DNA from an Ediacaran frond organism, but they're no more old, according to young Earth creationism, than woolly mammoths and trilobites. They're all smushing around 4,500 years ago. So how come we don't have better stuff? Don't hold your breath that there's ever going to be any serious discussion on that front. I don't see anybody in the comment stream, so it looks like we're alone on the show here. We may have a short operation under those circumstances. I'll give a little ongoing comment on the current political situation. The God King Emperor has taken wing in Air Force One. Eventually, he'll have a Qatari freebie plane to play around with in that wonderful era of grift and graft. Anyway, flying off to Israel to preen and get photo ops for the ceasefire agreement, which is supposedly peace in our time, which I hope happens. Whether or not that actually, there's been ceasefires before under Biden and previous administrations, and they've often fizzled out. So whether or not this one's going to really turn into something significant, if it does, find it dandy. Mr. Trump can get his little stab at the Nobel Prize, although I've heard that the program that was actually being proposed in this area was largely from Macron, and it was some of the groundwork, but this is information that has tended to get downplayed subsequently. I would be curious to know, and presumably historians will be blabbermouthing more and more about this as time goes on, whose arms got twisted, what was promised to whom, were any of the promises to the competing parties, because boy, the difference between Hamas not wanting to disarm and the Israeli extremists on the right wing really not wanting to give up exterminating Hamas and annexing Gaza seems kind of mutually contradictory kinds of proposals. So whether or not there is a long-lasting circumstance is another kettle of fish. Plus the fact that the Gaza has been bombed into rubble. Most people who even try to go home there's no home to go back to. Their houses have been blown, to be in refugee camps. Who's going to be doing all this construction? How long is it going to be taking? Will Trump trying to angle for a big Trump casino resort because he has this juvenile property development obsession, although over the years, he's really had very little. Matter of fact, I'm not sure that Trump has had any major property development that he personally owns. His name gets slapped onto things as a licensing agreement, but I'm not sure he has really much in the way of direct developments on this. Now, Kushner and some of these other people floating around in there, we still don't know what the Saudis gave for their $2 billion investment with Kushner. So it's a complicated mess. And assuming we still have a government in the post-Trump years, I'm sure there will probably be some investigations going on as to whose pockets were getting lined and how much money was being made in these areas, because there's certainly suspicions that there's an awful lot of graft going on amongst the money bag set that runs the Trump administration. Well, plus, of course, we have all of the ongoing bit that even a Trump appointed judge is saying that Trump's notions about cities on fire and therefore we get to send in the National Guard whether the governor asked for them or not is just unhinged and disconnected from reality. Speaking of disconnected from reality, there was Vice President Vance tap dancing around questions from George Stephanopoulos on the Sunday talk show. I think that Vance has cornered the market for the most svelte, polished, evasive bullshittery in modern politics. He has practically no peer. It's the sort of thing that just makes you want to pound the television screen because it's so brazen and evasive. You can't ask him a yes or no question on a matter and he won't answer it and be proud of not answering it. He keeps just saying, oh, you're just obsessing on this. This is all of your coverage. And he would simultaneously say, this is unimportant and I haven't studied it and I don't know anything about it, but I know enough to know that it's not important. That is kind of the circle jerk that's going on in his apologetic line. Walt Brown probably could defend a position more cogently than Vance does, but boy, Vance is self-confident as all get out. And he's just a heartbeat away from the presidency. Sleep happy on that little prospect. So anyway, things are going to be interesting. The stock market is kind of hovering around. It went down 800 points and that. There's certainly mounting forensic data that the economy is just skating on thin ice, and we have yet to really feel the brunt of these screwball tariffs. Soybean farmers, of course, have discovered that their entire markets dried up. Canadians have figured out new ways to sell to other people other than the United States. The various economies around the world are doing all sorts of things independent of us. So we'll be seeing what will be the circumstance as we move into the autumn, find out what shelves are empty and what places in the grocery store. Oh gosh, I didn't know that I was never supposed to use the word grocery prior to the God King Emperor, who apparently came up with that one just in his own mind. Anyway, that kind of fills in on the current circumstances on things. Oh, hi, Brian. Yes, I was just expounding on the political side of things. I'll just reprise the science end of things, that the Sarfati and Tay's little chapter 14 is little on did dinosaurs survive the flood. It was basically a rehash of creationist propaganda on how big the ark was and how survivable it was, and dinosaurs could start off little tiny things and then they would grow up faster later and so forth. And along the way, they only bumped into two technical papers, of which the 2001 one by Erickson, quite legitimately, they're misrepresenting the content of it. The 2004 one had actually been previously cited earlier in the book. It was about tyrannosaur growth rate, and I narrowly put it in the not misrepresenting context. But the fact that so much discussion about reptile, marsupial, bird metabolism rates, bone histology, and all of that, that's come and slam right into thermal dynamics going on in organisms, and they're definitely connecting birds and dinosaurs together. So that one I regarded as a misrepresentation. And the neat thing was that at this point, the creationists have cited the same number of creationist sources in the book as they have technical papers, 37% each, which is really high. And this Erickson paper adds one more to the little notch of things misrepresented. So they're running at pretty near 70% technical paper misrepresentation. We'll see what happens farther down the road. They've still got a few more chapters to be running amok on. This one had some more retreading of previous material that had already been cited elsewhere, just as the Erickson paper was. So we'll find out what things are going on down to the end of the road. And of course, next week we'll have some more Luskin stuff, of which don't hold your breath that there's going to be any technical papers in there that haven't basically retreading the same ground that we've been already retreading in previous times. In some respects, it's the most boring exercise in plowing through sidebar technical literature. The one things that really occasionally pop up as the most interesting aspect is if a very specialized molecule or something is mentioned, because at that point, I'm kind of curious as to whether or not they discuss it elsewhere, whether they deal with other papers on the subject, and or if it's old enough, what research has been gone on since. So I've been trying to follow up as much as I can in the previous episodes on that sort of stuff when you get multiple commentary bits in that, rather than just generic A to I editing stuff, which is pretty straightforward. So we will be continuing on all of that happy little topic from one bit after another. And as I said, I'm just tinkering with the tail ending of the Lost Squadron thing with the creationists that Kent Hovind plays a lot with, although there's quite a few others, and it keeps popping up like a little bob in the peripheral creationist lore. It's not a big deal obsession of modern mainstream creationism, but there was an awful lot of coverage on it in earlier years. That's kind of faded down unless you're down in the bottom echelon. So it's pretty much now a bellwether that if somebody is bringing up the Lost Squadron, they're probably riffing off of old posts that they bumped into from ICR or some lecture they've heard from Kent Hovind, because he loves to bring the thing up. Lost Squadron being this squadron of World War II aircraft, I think a couple B-17s and some P-38 escort planes that crashed during a storm in Greenland, and they never recovered the planes. And more recently, in the 90s and since, various people have located at least the fighters, because those are relatively small, and they're now buried under hundreds of feet of ice as the glaciers have continued to move on and the snow has continued to fall, and that therefore creationists are contending that because they are so deep, this proves that hundreds of feet of ice can form in just 80 years since the Second World War. The point is, ice doesn't look the same in ice cores. There's a compression factor, and there's a detail that you can tell the difference between ice that has been there for a long time and turned into a new layer form. It's kind of like a weird counterpart of lithification that you would be seeing in rock formations, that no practicing glaciologist has any trouble telling the difference between however much thickness of current ice snowfall there is versus the stuff that you see in those compressed layers that go down long after that. And of course, there's a whole bunch of ways of calibrating the matter, particularly ash fall from volcanic eruptions, from relatively recent things like Vesuvius, all the way back to stuff in the Middle Ages, and they have corroborations that they can calibrate things multiple ways, which has been brought up by Joel Duff and various other people, and generally downplayed by creationists. So, because you won't get that in Kent Hovind land. So that'll pop up in part of our area. Then we move on to the tail end when I get to grapple in the chapter with asteroids, comets, details about the planets, although most of that's being discussed in a different section of the chapter, and a little side swipe summary of some of the latest material on origin of life research and things that pop up in relation to exoplanets and the like. And then we can put that little puppy to bed and then move on to putting in the whale and Grand Canyon geology stuff in the chapter that Jackson has been, I hope, anxiously waiting for me to get to put in my 2 cents worth as he's continuing to work on the remaining chapters from him. And then I get to dive in to that Ark Encounter list that I think will be a very useful addition to the anti-creationist literature, because there's been virtually no detailed discussion except a few things online. Erica and a little bit of Dapper Dino have gone through segments of it. But a flat out list that lists off all the taxa in a way that people as scholars can find out what the hell's on the thing. It certainly is relevant because the Ark Encounter has hit the basement as to the minimum number of kinds they can get away with. It's not a difficult process to make it fairly plausible if they've only got like 14 or 1500 kinds. But these are radically low numbers compared to the 20,000 or more kinds that were in Woodmarap's feasibility study thing. So the Ark Encounter really just bit the bullet and went full out for families and found that, if they keep vertebrate families as the taxon thing and then kind of bypassed hominids completely, because that would drag in human beings as the same one as Australopithecines. They really just don't want to cover that little bit. But it's a valiant try. And at the very least, we'll want to have a nice list so that everybody can go at it. So anyway, let me put my little thank you note up here for our patrons who are sticking with us, thick and thin, thin and thick. And it's admittedly a dicey time. So everybody that's been able to continue to funnel out a little bit of moolah to help RJ slog along with the project, I totally appreciate it. And for anybody that may find that they can't afford that in the upcoming mess, look after your own circumstances first. Only if one has genuine surplus stuff floating around should you be swinging it my way, as appreciative as I am of the gifts. So, and I still got to check to see where my book royalties and stuff are coming in on that. So we will put up also our little advert for The Rocks Were There, Volume 1, which continues to get little sidebar mentions from people who have Dapper Dino was calling attention to, and my previous one, Evolution Slam Dunk, because the reptile mammal transition came up in a creationist screed that Dapper was pointing out. Sorry, RJ has written kind of the book on this subject that shows that they've misrepresented the source stuff. So don't overlook our little therapsids. Okay, let's get our little ad going here. Come, little Peppy. There we go. Voila. Got my picture up. Now all I got to do is make it so that you kids can see. And away we go. Volume 2 will be a nice little adjunct of it. And I think the lesson between Volume 1 and the second volume is that the scientific literature just keeps avalanching. And anybody that is a specialist in a field, if they want to tackle a particular topic in relation to their understanding of creationism, hear that, Erica, in due course, and the like, dive into it, because there's nothing more valuable in this area. And when you look at a particular subtopic, typically you can see an evolutionary process amongst the creationists as things are obsessed on, and then they slam into a data field that makes them problematic, and so it kind of fades away, and there'll be little blips and pieces of things saying, yeah, maybe we shouldn't use that argument anymore, and they would have these things of the fashion of which currently the soft tissue issue is one of the big current kids on the block. The cosmology chapter will be illustrating a lot of stuff of things that a lot of goalpost moving, a lot of obsessions about things decades ago and kind of fades away. And Danny Faulkner in particular has practically a cottage industry of saying, yeah, no, maybe we should change our minds on some of these things. Yeah, maybe dark matter is real. Yeah, maybe dark energy is real. Yeah, the cosmic expansion is real. Yeah. It's a fascinating process to go on there, where you've got other crowd. It's a very small group of people fiddle farting in the cosmology department, as in enough to have a couple fingers left over on one hand bunch. And it's fair to say that, boy, they have not set the creationist world really on fire, and certainly have made no dent whatsoever in the conventional astrophysics department. That once in a while there'll be some papers done. Jason Lyle and that can do a little paper occasionally, although most of their stuff, of those that have published in this field, are a long time ago. Some of them date back as far as Michael Behe's technical literature back in the 90s. So it's all an indication that when you see this bigger picture of the whole trajectory of their arguments, and how even Answers in Genesis has just hopscotched along from one topic to another, changing who they're dealing with, dropping branches of creationism that don't fit anymore, like Setterfield's slippery speed of light stuff that 20 years ago was being highlighted. Then the next books that start coming out in the early 2000s, whoop, gone. So it's an interesting bit of smoke and mirrors and shifting of perspectives. But it'll be really useful, and you'll learn a hell of a lot. I learned a hell of a lot of really quite fascinating science along the way, because I'm not an astrophysicist. And so although I was generally aware of the big picture of cosmology and the whole structure of things, diving into the little sub-details and the little nooks and crannies turned out to be really revealing. Not only time ago, bland covers on well-known phenomena. And to some extent, I have an advantage, a leg up, in coming into this area, because I'm an old fart. And so I'm aware of creationism going way back and so much of the material that can show some of the evolution of the process isn't necessarily available online. So anybody that's just trying to do material exclusively from stuff that they can get at on the internet is restricting themselves. You're in not too bad of a shape when it comes to the creationist journals, Journal of Creation, Creation Magazine, the Answers Research Journal, and all of that. They're really anal retentive about making that stuff available. Creation Research Society Quarterly, most of that is directly accessible. Most of the papers from a lot of the creationist conferences that are every couple of years or so, most of that stuff is available in one place or another. But print stuff, to know what Dwayne Gish was saying on a subject, or a lot of what Henry Morris was blathering about meteors and Archangel Michael throwing lightning bolts to make craters on the moon. I'm not making this up. You won't find in the modern internet literature, or even alluded to in the internet literature. There's a lot of shuffling to the side. It's like biblical racism and the like that just gets kind of shunted over to one side, especially by defenders like Jerry Bergman and all that crowd. But to know that print material of what was being done with Don DeYoung in the books and the like, some of that stuff is been digitized and is on like archive.org. That's helpful in some respects, but a lot of it isn't. They make advert money on it. Oh yeah, well, there's a great, but although it'd be really interesting to see more about the cash flow of things. Clearly, there has been some transmutation going on in certainly at the ICR, where their little Acts and Facts magazine that used to come out monthly has now become bi-monthly for quite a few years, and it's gotten shorter and shorter. So it's and retreading, as I pointed out regarding their research edition, an awful lot of just the same old stuff. Although they try to show a younger face on their public pictures, ICR has had some editorials and the like where they're kind of recognizing that everybody's becoming geriatric gray hairs like me in their area, that they're not really got a hell of a lot of young people. And there's some certain hangers-on every once in a while. Just one of the people that was cited in Sarfati and Tay in this particular chapter, guy name of Tom, last name Thom. I'd never heard of him before. And the little thing was a 2007 post. So, whoop, little sidebars and stuff. Generally speaking, I'm not adding a big avalanche of creationist authors, apart except for like the lower echelon level, people you encounter online and internet kind of stuff. But the kind of bigger guns and heavy duty people that are doing technical papers and presentations at creationist conferences, that bunch has not expanded radically. There's been, maybe half a dozen people who have been added to the fray in the last 15 years, maybe. That's not a growing field. And they're very confident, and they can be charming apologetically, et cetera, et cetera. But when you compare that to the vast array, just the technical authors on the papers that I have in my reference bibliography are way past 80,000 people. And there's new people coming along all the time, entering into this area. And it's a very collaborative field. Whereas very rare to find a creationist technical article that's written by more than 3 or 4 people. Whereas in the regular scientific community, it's routine, particularly cutting-edge major paleontological and scientific work, astronomical papers. My God, these things can have 50 or 60 authors or more. And that's because there's an awful lot of people doing the stuff. Now, we know that there's money bags in the creationist movement. You've got people bankrolling the Hobby Lobby's Bible Museum and the like, and yet you don't find these people endowing research programs on creationist topics. Maybe they would, part of their brain realizes this would be as useless as underwriting a let's search for oil based on the Bible Zion Oil example. So they're not putting their money where their mouth is in this respect, and that's perhaps telling you something about it. They're just spinning their wheels with the apologetic arguments, and of course playing the culture camp game. Although it is intriguing, at least so far, creationists have played virtually no part in a doctrinal level in the obsessions of the Trump administration. Even though Speaker of the House Johnson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, there's certainly no shortage of creationists knocking around inside of Trumplandia. But they've never made it a big deal, at least yet. They have other obsessions about DEI and woke and trying to excise references to how bad the Civil War was and slavery in the Smithsonian and all of that stuff. All of that Glee Club view of the world that Russell Vought and the Heritage Foundation has, and for that matter, the PragerU, which links up with a couple states that are trying to be making, I think Tennessee and a few others are trying to use PragerU apologetics as part of their school curriculum or collegiate curriculum, which is glossily, nicely made stuff from a propaganda point of view, but claptrap when you start looking at the details, as various people have pointed out in various contexts. So anyway, that brings us, well, we're coming up on 40 minutes. So given the fact that We pretty well shot our wad on our technical front. We'll put the links in, of course, tomorrow once our little things are finalized. Next week, remember, we'll have some more Luskin yawn as our part 2, and we'll continue on. That's going to take an awful long time to plow through. With all of the balls that I have in the air, it's not a spectacular priority, because I think the KKK first and YEC second. Yeah, that may very well be it, that the obsessions they have about Christian nationalism as a cultural phenomenon is far more interesting to them than whether there were dinosaurs on Noah's Ark, and whether or not the National Science Foundation is going to recognize that or not. But if they were to continue to gain traction in political authority, it wouldn't surprise me somewhere down the line that they would be starting to make a big deal of it. But yes, they've got an awful lot of nasty little pies baking in the oven as it is. Vought and Project 2025, the last number I saw, that they'd already adopted about 40 or more % of it. He's got multiple hats on where he's running a bunch of things. I think he's budget manager and a few other things, so where he can get an awful lot of firings of people and cancellation of programs. The stupid Supreme Court has kind of been bending over backwards, letting Trump do what Nixon was unable to because it's unconstitutional, which is sequestration of funds, just not spending money that Congress has appropriated. And this is as patently unconstitutional a thing as you could ever get at. And if there were still any Republicans in the Trumpista party, they would probably be screaming bloody murder about it, but they're long gone. So, whoop, good old days of Everett Dirksen and some of these people who would have been paying really big attention to this kind of stuff. Nah, not in this crowd that has the temerity to call themselves Republicans. Blah, okay, so yeah, oh yes, okay. If I'm getting some audio glitches, and that will probably have to pull a plug on the thing. Anyway, so everybody stay safe. Weather's gotten cooler over here. There's still problems in a lot of little locations. You may or may not have the end of the Gaza war. Ukraine is still going on and is a thing. It's an exciting world that we live in, and everybody try to keep your powder dry while we move on to next week. And watch out for the wooden penguins, especially the ones armed with laser beams. So, ending the stream.